So here's a thought. What happens when Europe can no longer count on America's nuclear shield? For decades, the U.S. has been the backbone of Europe's nuclear defense. But now, with Trump questioning NATO's commitments, European leaders are asking, do we need our own nuclear arsenal? A seismic shift could be underway, and the stakes couldn't be higher. What is Europe's nuclear dilemma, and what does it mean for global security and a potential beginning of nuclear proliferation? What does this mean for the world? And yes, even for the United States. Welcome to That's Life, I Swear. This podcast is about life's happenings in this world that conjure up such words as intriguing, frightening, life-changing, inspiring, and more. I'm Rick Barron, your host. That said, here's the rest of this story. There's a troubling landscape of nuclear security in Europe, underscoring the fragility of the United States nuclear umbrella and the mounting pressures on France and Britain to assume a greater deterrence of responsibilities. The implications of this shift are profound, carrying risk of political fragmentation, strategic miscalculations, and nuclear proliferation. There's been an erosion of U.S. nuclear assurance going on lately. For decades, NATO's nuclear deterrence strategy has relied on the unwavering commitment of the United States. However, recent developments, including President Trump's erratic approach to European security and temporary discontinuance of aid to Ukraine, have cast doubt on Washington's reliability. The specter of a diminished U.S. role has prompted European leaders to reconsider their nuclear posture. Germany, for example, a country that has historically depended on American nuclear arms, is now engaging in discussions about alternative nuclear arrangements, once an unthinkable proposition. This certainty has emboldened discussions about a European nuclear umbrella independent of the United States oversight. Now think about this. Such a shift would challenge a long-standing transatlantic security framework, risking a fragmentation of NATO's deterrence strategy. Without a strong and predictable U.S. commitment, European nations may find themselves in a very precarious strategic position, relying on a nuclear arsenal that is neither expansive nor entirely fit for the evolving threats posed by Russia. Now, what's the feasibility and risk of a European nuclear umbrella? The logistics of establishing a European nuclear deterrent are daunting. France and Britain, the only European nuclear powers, have limited arsenals tailored primarily for national deterrence rather than extended protection. Britain has a nuclear arsenal of 250 warheads, while France possesses 290 warheads, respectively. France in particular has staunchly maintained that the decision to launch a nuclear strike would remain solely in the hands of its president. Britain's nuclear forces, meanwhile, are entirely submarine-based and reliant on U.S. technology and logistical support. Additionally, Britain can't engage in nuclear exercises like France, because each time one of its submarines surfaces, its location is disclosed, thus making it a potential target. A European nuclear umbrella would require extensive technological adaptations, infrastructure investments, and new command and control frameworks, which would be costly and time-consuming. Moreover, compliance with the Treaty on the Non-Proliferation of Nuclear Weapons would pose additional diplomatic hurdles. If European nations sought greater autonomy over nuclear arms, they would need to navigate a legal minefield that could potentially undermine non-proliferation efforts and exacerbate global tensions. One of the most concerning aspects of this shift is the increased reliance on what they call nuclear signaling, a practice in which nuclear powers engage in overt displays of power to deter adversaries. What France does is what is called poker exercises, and this is where they use Rafale jets, where they simulate nuclear strikes. However, such maneuvers carry inherent risks, particularly in an era of heightened geopolitical tensions. Unlike the Cold War era, where nuclear posturing was largely predictable, within the framework of the U.S.-Soviet deterrence, today's nuclear environment is far more complex and dangerous. The possibility of misinterpretation or escalation is alarmingly high. A miscalculated nuclear drill or an ambiguous signal could provoke unintended retaliatory measures from Russia, raising the specter of a catastrophic conflict. Britain's nuclear deterrent is in a state of concerning fragility. The nation's entire nuclear strategy hinges on just 4 submarines armed with Trident missiles that are leased from the United States and subject to American oversight. Now, past test failures, including the infamous 2016 incident in which a missile veered towards the United States before being self-destructed, highlight the vulnerabilities in Britain's nuclear infrastructure. Furthermore, Britain's ongoing nuclear modernization efforts are financially straining its military budget, forcing difficult trade-offs between nuclear and conventional defense spending. The risk of a underfunded, technological-dependent nuclear force raises serious doubts about its effectiveness as a credible deterrent. Britain must confront these fundamental weaknesses and the economic burdens associated with nuclear submarines to play a more significant role in European nuclear strategy. Now, what's the geopolitical fallout of a European nuclear initiative? Beyond the logistical and deep concerns, the political ramifications of a European nuclear force would be severe. European unity, already tested by Brexit and divergent national interests, would be further strained by disagreements over nuclear control and burden sharing. The idea of ceding nuclear authority to France or Britain is politically complex, as countries like Germany and Poland may resist relying on the decisions of a neighboring power rather than the established NATO framework. Additionally, such a move could provoke retaliatory responses from Russia. Moscow has historically viewed NATO's nuclear posture as a direct threat, and any European attempts to bolster their independent deterrent could be perceived as an aggressive escalation. This could prompt Russia to expand its arsenal, deploy additional tactical nuclear weapons, or engage in more frequent nuclear drills, accelerating a dangerous arms race. So, is this a grim nuclear future? The shifting nuclear dynamics in Europe signal a very concerning trend. The erosion of U.S. nuclear guarantees and the limitations of Britain and France's nuclear capabilities create a volatile security landscape. While a European nuclear umbrella may seem like a necessary response to Russian aggression and American unpredictability, its execution is mixed with technical, financial, diplomatic, and strategic risk. If European nations pursue this path, they must do so with extreme caution, recognizing that nuclear deterrence is not just about possessing weapons, but about maintaining stability through clear commitments and predictable strategies. The last thing Europe needs is an ill-conceived nuclear initiative that increases uncertainty, weakens alliances, and inadvertently heightens the risk of nuclear confrontation. The stakes are extremely high, and the road ahead offers no easy solutions. One miscalculation, one diplomatic failure, or one technological shortcoming could push the world closer to the brink of nuclear catastrophe. So where does this leave us? Where does this leave the world? Europe faces an urgent and daunting reality. It must now take on the role the United States once played as the arsenal of democracy, a term that Franklin D. Roosevelt used to describe America's commitment to defending its allies from fascism during World War II. With U.S. support for Ukraine hanging by a thread, and Washington's once reliable security guarantees in question, Europe is left scrambling to fill the void before it's too late. The stakes could not be higher. The European Union has launched a staggering $840 billion defense initiative, and Germany has been forced to rewrite its own constitutional rules to shoulder unprecedented levels of debt, all in a desperate bid to shore up Europe's ability to defend itself. But these efforts may not be enough. Weapons production must be ramped up at an alarming pace, and Europe's militaries must prepare for a future in which American protection is no longer a given. The return of Donald Trump looms large. While he has yet to withdraw the U.S. from NATO formally, his repeated insinuations that he might abandon Europe in its hour of need are a chilling reminder that the transatlantic alliance is no longer guaranteed. Meanwhile, the United Kingdom is no longer in the European Union and is racing to strengthen ties with its neighbors, particularly in Ukraine. As one of only two nuclear powers in Europe, Britain's role in shaping an independent continental defense strategy is now more critical than ever. So let's be very clear here. Failure is not an option. The consequences could be catastrophic if Europe cannot rise to the occasion. Russia's war in Ukraine would only be the beginning. Other European nations could be next. What's even worse, the world's most ruthless leaders and autocrats would be emboldened, learning a dangerous lesson that aggression and the violation of sovereign nations comes without consequences. And the threats go beyond the battlefield. As the U.S. retreats from its role as a global voice for democracy, the damage is spreading to the information war. The Trump administration's gutting of the United States Agency for Global Media has left a vacuum where once America stood firm in promoting a free press through institutions like Voice of America and Radio Free Europe. Without a coordinated effort to counter misinformation and authoritarian propaganda, the very fabric of democratic societies is at risk, a very high risk. Europe's moment of reckoning has arrived. The question is, will it act in time? So what can we learn from this story? What's the takeaway? What is clear is that we are witnessing the early stages of a potential paradigm shift in nuclear politics with profound implications on global security. The fact that European leaders openly discuss these options represents a failure of the post-war security order and opens a troubling new chapter in international relations. Well, there you go, my friends. That's life, I swear. For further information regarding the material covered in this episode, I invite you to visit my website, which you can find on Apple Podcasts, for show notes and the episode transcript. As always, I thank you for the privilege of you listening and your interest. Be sure to subscribe here or wherever you get your podcasts so you don't miss an episode. And we'll see you soon.